The Zen Environment by Marian Mountain, jumping in over your head. About a month ago, I ran into a wall. Nothing I wrote had a spark of life or truth to it. I didn't want to stop writing because I was sure that when I began again, I would just have to push through that same impasse. So I kept writing pages of dead words every day. At the same time, I was trying to work through this problem. Jack was trying to solve some problems of his own when we were both irritable. Last Monday, Jack came home and he asked me a question in the middle of a dead paragraph. I didn't stop typing and I didn't answer him. Even when he's feeling good, Jack doesn't like to hear the sound of the typewriter. It gets on his nerves. He puts little faith in written words and considers reading and writing a waste of real life. So I should have known, but, well, you know how it is sometimes. Jack picked up my typewriter, took it out onto the deck, and threw it as far as he could. It landed 100 feet down the canyon. I was furious. It was an excellent typewriter that had been given to me by a friend. Jack and I had a rip-roaring fight that lasted 2 full days. It's still a little early to tell for sure, but we both feel we made definite progress in pushing through our mental blocks. He has promised to buy me a new typewriter someday when he makes some extra money. In the meantime, I'm using an old typewriter my sister sent me. It has a few mechanical problems, but considering its age, it writes passable paragraphs. Some even show a spark of life. Talking or reading about Zen is like sticking your big toe in the water. In order to know what Zen is all about, you have to jump in over your head. One of my Zen teachers, Dainin Katagiri Roshi, used to say, if you want to learn how to swim, just jump into the water. The water will hold you up. If you want to learn how to do Zazen, just jump into Zazen, and Zazen will hold you up. Most of us learned to swim when we were very young, so we may have forgotten the thrill of the first time we jumped into the water over our heads. Even though we held our nose and closed our eyes, we could not help but wonder as we sank deeper and deeper into the water if we would ever come up again. But just as we were about to give up hope, we found ourselves floating back up to the surface again. Later, after we learned to trust the water, we discovered that when we relaxed, we could float. The water held us up. No matter how many times we may have seen the water support other swimmers, we will never have complete trust in the water until we've experienced directly the water's support for yourself. And it's not until we've actually experienced the fact that Zazen will hold us up that we really know what this means. When we are talking or reading about Zen, we're standing at the edge of the water testing it with our big toe. When we're trying to practice Zazen, we've jumped into the water over our head. And when Zen has been fully integrated in our life, we are floating comfortably on the surface of the water. Not all the way in, not all the way out. The world above the water is the realm of ordinary consciousness, the realm of everyday life. The world under the water is the realm of sorcery and magic, the world of mythology, miracles, and madness. To know only the world above the water is to be caught in the realm of ordinary men. To spend too much time under the water is to be caught by the spells of sorcery. The time when we jumped into Zen over our head is very strange and sometimes frightening, a frightening period of our life. The first half dozen years of practicing Zazen are apt to be filled with various kinds of emotional, intellectual, physical, and psychological problems. When we jump into Zazen, head first, we often make such a big splash that friends and relatives get their images of us dampened. To those standing on the sidelines, it may seem that Zazen is making us very confused, and we may sometimes think that our friends might be right. As we sink down into the depths of our mind with our eyes open, we become aware of phenomena that we had not noticed before. But the phenomena that we encounter in our mind and the problems that we encounter in daily life that Zazen seems to intensify are like bubbles that we see under the water, or like drops of water that are splashed on the bystanders. If we continue to practice Zazen, we will find the problems in our mind will float to the surface and dissolve. And if we continue to practice Zazen, we will find that the problems in the minds of our friends and relatives will evaporate without having caused any permanent damage. When we first begin to practice Zazen, we may feel very awkward. Nevertheless, even if the best we can do is a belly flop, we need not feel ashamed of our style. A Zen teacher of mine often quoted her Japanese tea master, who told his students, "If you're born clumsy, it's not bad. And if you're born clever, it's not good. The proper way to serve tea is to find your own way." This is the attitude we should cultivate when we practice Zazen. If we are clumsy at Zazen, it's not bad. If we are clever at Zazen, it's not good. The proper way, the only way to practice Zazen is to find our own way. We just have to jump into Zazen, and Zazen will show us our way. I encountered many emotional and psychological problems in my own Zen practice. Sometimes it seemed as if I were getting in so far over my head that I might drown myself in my mental problems. Sometimes my behavior bewildered my companions and Zen teachers. But as I continued to practice Zazen and to sink deeper and deeper into the confusion of my own mind, I discovered that no matter how low I sank, Zazen always brought me safely back to the surface again. It was not until I left all my Zen teachers and all my Zen companions, however, that I learned to trust Zazen completely. When I put all that trust in my own Zazen, I was able to stop comparing my Zen practice with the Zen practice of other students or teachers. I was able to give up discriminating between crazy Zen practice and sane Zen practice, between poor Zen practice and good Zen practice, between wrong Zen practice and correct Zen practice. When I put all my trust in my own Zazen, I was able to give up thinking about how to practice Zazen and let Zazen do what it wanted with me. Relaxed, I found myself floating calmly on the surface of my own confusion. We should not feel surprised or frightened if we encounter disturbing physical or mental phenomena now and then during our Zen practice. The condition is not uncommon. In fact, some spiritual disciplines seek to intensify and prolong contact with this level of experience. In Carlos Castaneda's accounts of his own training under the Yaqui Indian Don Juan, he tells of the cultivation of the level of consciousness through the use of peyote and other psychotropic plants. But once he becomes familiar with the world of Don Juan's sorcery, Carlos Castaneda's teachers warns him that this drug-altered consciousness is not the world of seeing, as Buddhists would say, seeing things as they are. The purpose of using psychotropic plants is only to help the student give up his strong attachment to perceiving the world through his rigidly conditioned mind. In his book, Journey to Ixtlan, Carlos Castaneda tells of an experience he had one day when he found he could talk in quotes, to a coyote. Castaneda's teacher explained that this is what happens to a sorcerer's apprentice when the ordinary world stops. Usually, we look at the world through the thinking mind, which has been conditioned to see it in an ordinary way. From the day we are born, we are told what the world is like, so we see it only through the screen of ordinary thoughts. When Castaneda found that he could talk to a coyote, He had simply acquired the ability to experience the world in a way Don Juan had been training him for years to experience it, through the mind of a sorcerer. In the world of sorcerers, animals and all other living things are able to talk. Don Juan cautions Castaneda to be careful not to get attached to the sorcerer's world. The aim of Don Juan's teaching is to help the student to learn to see. Seeing, according to Don Juan, is the art of sneaking between the worlds. In Zen Buddhism, seeing things as they are is experiencing everything with an unconditional mind. When we begin to practice Zen, mountains and rivers and coyotes are just ordinary mountains and rivers and coyotes. After we have learned to look at the world through the eyes of Buddhism, mountains and rivers and coyotes are no longer just ordinary mountains and rivers and coyotes. They become extraordinary. But when we fully realize the practice of Zen, mountains and rivers and coyotes are just mountains and rivers and coyotes, not ordinary and not extraordinary. In the practice of Zazen, visions and strange mental states, such as hallucinations, called makyo, M-A-K-Y-O in Japanese, are considered obstructions to meditation. When these mental conditions affect our behavior, we may find ourselves freaking out in some way or another. Hakuin, the founder of the Japanese Rinzai Zen school, spoke of his long and difficult encounter with the kind of psychological disturbance familiar to medieval contemplatives. From the knowledge of himself, which he learned, from which he called his Zen sickness, Hakuin, H-A-K-U-I-N, became a strong and effective Zen teacher. Dr. Edward Conze, C-O-N-Z-E, the Buddhist scholar, says that the tantras being secret meditations of Tibetan Buddhism, evolved to some extent to cope with the psychic disturbances encountered in the development of the spiritual life. Dr. Conze says, quote, "The complacency of people who never exert any pressure upon themselves is startled and secretly gratified by the spiritual, mental, and physical disorders of those who really attempt to do something. These disturbances, like the dark night of the spirit, in brackets, a prolonged state of spiritual depression, are not signs of failure, as the untutored worldling is apt to suppose, but signs of growth, the creaking of the rheumatic joints foretelling their eventual mobility." End quote. The important thing in encountering any kind of unusual mental or physical phenomena is to let it come in and let it go out. If you try to prevent this kind of activity, it will control you unconsciously. If you become fascinated by this kind of activity, it will control you consciously. The founder of the Christian Science method of faith healing, Mary Baker Eddy, observed that many of her patients exhibited disturbed physical and mental disorders just prior to their complete recovery. She called this condition chemicalization and believed that it was caused by the poisons of error or illusion being expelled from the mind by the light of truth. Perhaps the classic example of psychic disturbance in Buddhism is the period just prior to Gautama Buddha's enlightenment under the Bodhi tree. When the hosts of Mara, M-A-R-A, the spirit of evil or ignorance, assaulted Shakyamuni with temptations and terrors. I think Mrs. Eddy's term chemicalization is a good description of what happens to us when we sometimes practice Zazen. When we extend the truth of Zazen deeper and deeper into the dark regions of the mind, it's like dropping an Alka-Seltzer tablet into a glass of water. Thousands of tiny bubbles begin to disturb the water, but after the Alka-Seltzer tablet and the water are completely mixed, the bubbles disappear and the water becomes clear again. When the truth of Zazen sinks down into your mind, it creates bubbles of confusion, which temporarily cloud the mind. But after Zazen and mind are fully blended, the confusion disappears. When we drink the mixture of Alka-Seltzer and water, we settle our upset stomach. When we digest the mixture of Zazen and life, we settle our upset mind.